Blessings, everyone, and welcome back to our 29th episode in our journey through the zodiacal faces. I'm astrologer Elsa Wadsworth, and I'm joined again today by brilliant astrologers KD Dayton from kddayton.com and David Fisher from In the First Place Astrology. So we are here for Capricorn II. Welcome back, Capricorns. And we have a special birthday this Decan. Happy birthday, David.
Thank you. I feel honored to be sharing this special date with you guys.
Oh, we're all so happy you're here, and we hope you have a very blessed birthday. We've got a Capricorn II in the house. So the dates for this Decan are the 31st or the 1st through the 10th or 11th. So that's the 31st of December through the 10th or 11th of January. So again, Happy New Year, everyone. And I hope you all had an amazing holiday. Let's go ahead and just introduce Austin Coppock calls this the pyramid, which is awesome. Susan Chang calls this time and materials. And then the Hermetic name for the minor arcana is the Lord of Material Work. And it's the Three of Pentacles or the Three of Coins. We still have the Devil representing all of Capricorn, the Devil card here. This Decan is co-ruled by Mars. So we are here again with the blasted tower. So now we've got Saturn and Mars in service of Saturn. And one thing I guess we should mention off the bat about Mars, or what I thought is kind of like interesting. Again, we have another sort of like interesting lineup where in Sag 3, we had Jupiter, Saturn, and then in Capricorn 1, we had Saturn, Jupiter. And Jupiter takes its fall in Capricorn, whereas it's opposite for Mars. Mars takes its exaltation in Capricorn. So if, a lot of times how I think about this is if Saturn is like a general, Mars is like the infantryman or something like this. So they kind of work well together. Saturn has this big plan that it wants to execute, and Mars has like a lot of energy and gusto to get it done at its best. So when we're looking at Mars in its exaltation, we're kind of looking at the exemplary qualities of Mars. So not necessarily the, cutting and violent sort of transgressions, or the adulterous kind of like, wild man. We're a little bit looking at like the raw energy or the energy of protection or the energy to get things done and build and be in service of something greater, which is like a master plan, shall we say, or like a tactical sort of Mars. When you have Saturn sort of, I guess, calling the shots for Mars.
We have both malefics dignified here. And when we are talking about dignity in a planet, we are talking about selecting those principles from that planet, those traits that we would call higher in vibration or whatever, if you want to put it in those terms. I'm just
like a high vibe polarity, or like its best qualities or something like that. Like it's most constructive, I guess, qualities you could say.
Yes. And so in this particular decan, you see the qualities of the malefics being abundant, meaning it's not an easy decan. It's not a very agreeable energy, when you're talking about comfort, but it is a very productive energy, a momentous energy, a very potent kind of energy mix. It produces perhaps good results, but you will see an emphasis on the maleficence here, even though it is very productive and abundant in some ways.
Energy of Saturn as the general and Mars as the warrior. In order for, a war, a campaign, a battle to be successful, which could be, on behalf of a very worthy cause, you have to have both of those positions, which are represented here by the malefics. You have to have the person with raw energy willing to go out and fight, but you also have the general who has the long view, who has the strategy, who has the, guess you could say, organization to get all of the raw energy directed where it needs to go.
And a little bit the vision. So when we're talking about Capricorn, and I kind of wanted to, like, this is going to be a little bit of my emphasis. I hope I don't belabor it too much. But the version of Capricorn that's like achievement oriented or something. But in order to have like a big dream, like when I think the pyramid, right? Like in order to have these like big works that span over decades, that take, multiple people and like big labor forces and, you know, kind of the grand scale of something, you have to have a lot of vision. You have to have like this long-term goal, which I think is Saturn, is like having like one mind for something. Like, this is the goal, and it's been like 3 decades and you're still working on the book, or you're still working on the vision or whatever. And I think Saturn sort of can get you through the long haul when you don't like want to do it, but it also has the vision of like the mountaintop. It sees the peak and it just keeps going despite any circumstances, right? And when it has Mars, which is like a giant labor force, and even Saturn is like the laborer, right? And this sort of low paid worker, and it takes like tons and tons and tons of like vision and, like you said, organization, but a lot of labor to take on these like giant projects. So it's kind of like the ruthless one-track minded CEO kind of vibe, but it has like all this energy behind it because Mars is in service of it. So, and Mars doesn't care if what it has to do or how much raw power it has to exert or something like that. So we've got this enfleshment that happens in the first phase of Capricorn, but this phase here, the second phase of Capricorn, shows visions of what might be upon the earth. So we've got blueprints as a type of revelation. So, you know, and I just want to say, like, straight out of the gate, like, I tend to think of like material creation with like a negative connotation, especially coming from like the capitalist society that we're in and blah, blah, blah. But, you know, there's this museum project that I'm going to go see here. And I was just thinking of like the immensity of great works. Like if you think of Göbekli Tepe or the pyramids or some of these things, some of these temples in India that have just been around for thousands of years, like giving the benefit of the doubt to those things that they could have been for power or for glory, which we will talk about. But the idea that humanity would make something that's like so lasting leaves a real impression on almost like your psyche or your spirituality, that we could take these big, do these big things, these great works of art. And it's very inspiring. It's very beautiful. So I want us to just make sure that we're not only looking at it from like the achievement oriented, like capitalistic, sort of like Tower of Babel, which we'll get into, but also that like those great works do mean a lot to humanity, and they are extremely inspiring in a lot of ways, like these masterpieces, you know, that have, you know, even like Hellenistic astrology, it's such a masterpiece that it's like went through this huge expanse of time in order to like reach us, like great works, you know. So, you know, that's something I wanted to say right away that I forgot, but in like that type of revelation, right? Like you have this huge vision that doesn't even seem possible, which I think, you know, we'll get into when we talk a little bit more in the Picatrix, how these things, it doesn't even seem like they could be real, but yet they become manifest, and they're these like gifts to humanity in a sense. So from these visions, it's back to Austin. From these visions comes the necessity of gathering resources and power to make the project real. So here you have like the mind, the heart, the body, and the roles of the architect, the taskmaster, and the laborer. The focus here is on constructing the territory itself. So castles are built, labyrinths of laws and hierarchies are established, and it's where the architecture of civilization takes shape. So he talks about it being not a green thing like you find in Taurus, but one of materials, stones, and even bones. You know, generations kind of are implied through like the bones. It's not just the muscle that it takes, but the kind of longevity. So the project or the vision creates these laws of action that are necessary for an actual proper realization. And these works are constructions that can span entire decades. So in the Yavana Jataka, it describes a man of blazing splendor with an armor and sword, and wanders about constructing on river embankments and tanks and aqueducts. So I think that's really interesting because you've got the Saturn with the river embankments and aqueducts and things like this. And then you've got the armored swordman, which is kind of Martian. So Austin goes on to say that the martial kind of signification here is not merely an image of constructing things, but something that or someone that has the power to actively manifest them. So he is an architect, a foreman, a laborer, yet what emerges is not solo projects. So it's not just something that you go out and get. They require many people's energy and it has to be harnessed in a way to make like the great plan. So history remembers those whose works endure, but it conceals the thousands who did not achieve their aim. So having like many, many, many great works just being lost to the sands of time, or just not finding an audience, or not, you know, coming to any type of conclusion that's lasting.
Example of the Olympics, for instance, or the World Cups, the FIFA World Cups, where you have a lot of work directed towards that one goal. Is a great work. It's like something comparable to wonders that humanity has achieved, you know, because it's in that level. But nowadays, because of capitalism and the way it's developed, and industrialism and all of that, we don't see those great works for what they are. And thus, I think this side of this particular Decan that shows in these great endeavors is through the way that these great works are undervalued by society nowadays. Like, it's common, but also how it undermines the personal narrative of everyone involved that had their lives cut short, or have their lives disrupted in some way because of these events. Like in Qatar, recently we had this example of the foreign community coming in and witnessing all of that work being done by people who don't have means to sustain their own lives regularly, you know, in that particular country, or in countries around, like immigrants that came in to do all of those great works. They're not being recognized. They're not even being paid properly or fed, or they don't have good conditions of labor in these places that they are in. And I think that, again, the maleficence that I'm trying to pull our attention to right here is key to understand the nature of some things in life. It's like, yes, you can have great works done to this unimaginable scale, but is it something of value? Is it something that is worth obtaining? That's another matter, you know, that the malefics don't necessarily speak to.
Yeah, and I think like the degeneration over time, where now like great works have just been like you said, like undermined to where it's just like a capitalistic achievement. It's more like Tower of Babel style, where it's just like we don't really know what we're aiming for. It doesn't have any like, you know, undertone of like a great work for the next generation of humanity. And maybe I'm, you know, maybe I'm
the devil.
Yeah, maybe I'm a little bit like cynical or something, because we do have all these technological inventions, and you know, we've got the internet and we've got space mobiles and stuff. But when I think about like great works of humanity, I tend to think of the past, like, you know, like the pyramids and the temples and the sort of, you know, like the Mayans and all these kind of like beautiful first languages that just get kind of corrupted over time, I suppose. Or in this generation, we just think of it as like a capitalistic endeavor that doesn't leave like a whole lot for, you know, 2,000 years from now. Are we really going to care about all the works that we're doing now? Which it does speak to this sort of the degenerate like force of the malefics, like how you place your energy when you can, you know, use these labor forces. And I'm sure I'm romanticizing it a little bit, because I'm sure to get these works done in the past, there was many atrocities that happened to the working class in order to get these like king class, like pharaoh, you know, coffins essentially done, and all these riches are buried instead of distributed. So definitely a good point to bring that up. So then we'll talk about it more when it comes to the Picatrix, but then Agrippa in the 3 books of the occult philosophy talks about this being a face of requiring of those things which cannot be done and searching after the things which cannot be known. And I think that also can kind of talk about that like mystical quality of Saturn, like Schmidt saying, you know, David, you'll recognize this too, Schmidt saying that Saturn sees everything except for the thing that it's supposed to be looking for, or whatever, you know? So this really reminded me of that, of like, you know, you're kind of searching for occulted knowledge. You're kind of searching for things that actually can't be known. You're asking the questions that don't really have answers. And there's something kind of beautiful in that on a spiritual or occulted level. And then there's kind of something, I guess, wasted in a way with that energy too. So I think that speaks to the like malefics, or especially Saturn, kind of just like wasting time or precious energy, kind of like trying to think about or vision something that's never going to be manifest or doesn't.
The Picatrix shows the image of a man standing in front of a common ape, and it says that it's the form of seeking to do what cannot be done and to obtain what cannot be. So that's basically it's saying that things have limits, natural limits, circumstantial limits. Consciousness has its limits, its blind spots, as you were saying, Elsa. Like Saturn looks for everything. It's agnoia, it's ignorance. It's looking for everything but what it's supposed to be paying attention to. It is its nature to miss what it's supposed to be looking directly towards. So by comparing the man and the ape, I think it's like this limit of the animal within us. Like it is this mimicry of consciousness that sometimes we get into when we are in that devil state, like foreshadowing what we're going to get into a little later. But it is getting too much into the animal within, the monkey within, you know, sometimes. And thus you are utilizing consciousness, but in such a primitive way, such a ground level way that you might get lost in unattainable endeavors, because it's something that is spinning out of not truth, not necessity, but kind of the wrong things.
Yeah, and I think it's so easy to do that in the material realm, or in the realm of the devil, in the realm of like consciousness, where it's like Saturn is ignorance, right? But yet there's this like deep part of Saturn that's like that, you know, you've got the goat part, which is the ambition, and then you've got the tail, which is in these sort of like primordial waters. So there's something like mystical about asking those questions and doing those things, but it's very hard, again, like to aim our consciousness properly. We talked about this in the devil card before, where it's like you have the ability to take off the chains, but it's just not as easy as it seems to like direct your consciousness in that way. And I think a lot of times people view Capricorn as like seeing the peak of the mountain and knowing exactly where to go. But we all know that when you have that like one pointed sight, sometimes, you know, in materialism, we're aiming our one pointed sight to the wrong thing, like making all the money, not spending time with the family, or, you know, directing our consciousness towards like, I don't know, kindness or generosity, or, you know, I don't want to like make a hierarchy of like how we should aim our consciousness, but I think you guys get the point. So
it can also give like mastery over practical matters, or certain crafts, I guess, but things that you need to be very proficient to be able to be considered a professional in that area. Let's say those people who have a very specific job in a particular religion to consecrate a particular ritual or something like that, and that is a very important job, and it's very specific, and it's through a very narrow path that they insist on forever and ever, that they are able to be considered masters of that particular practice. You know, I think you could see this in this particular decan as well, because of all those characteristics.
Absolutely, you make a great point. And just to add to that is, you know, I think a lot of times when in Mars's exaltation of like the marksman, which makes me think of like, you know, instead of like this bloody battle with like swords and just like fighting and just kind of like random Martian aggression, you have someone who's trained their entire life to like hit a specific target or whatever, you know? So it can be like very specialized. And, you know, I do think of Saturn in a lot of ways as like the yogic, like withdrawing from the world and withdrawing from material possessions and things like that. So not to say that there isn't that, but okay, moving on, back to Austin. So, you know, and I'm glad you brought in the Picatrix now, because, you know, Agrippa basically parrots what the Picatrix says with the, you know, seeking matters that really can't be. So in this deck, and then Austin goes on to say impossible or ill-fated projects are also here. So like the Tower of Babel, and he's saying that, you cannot, the idea with the Tower of Babel was to, like get to heaven or get to God in this like man-made way. And so the heavens cannot be pierced by a tower, and money cannot buy wisdom. So I think that that's kind of that dichotomy that we're talking about in Capricorn of like the intense achievement oriented thing, but we all know like money can't buy certain things, and like we can't really reach God through man-made, toils or something like this. So then he talks about how ambition and hubris are not easily separated, but this ambition that we have, this raw force and this big vision, raw force of Mars and big vision of Saturn, ambition must be distilled from hubris over and over again in order to achieve like the purity of purpose for the project, right? So it's like you have to really keep yourself in check as to what the thing is that you're trying to manifest, and is it in a good way, which I think David brought up earlier with the games and things like that.
I just want to say one thing here briefly, which I'll probably refer back to when we're looking at the tarot cards, but one of the things that really makes me think of this Decan is the book by Ken Follett, Pillars of the Earth, in which the main character or one of the main characters is building a cathedral in the 1500s. And think about the massive amount of work and raw energy and raw materials that was required to do that. And then think about the fact that this one person, this character, that cathedral is not going to be finished in his lifetime. His name might not even be associated with it. It's going to take multiple lifetimes, multiple people in service of that one focused goal in order to get that cathedral built. So
yeah,
analogy.
Exactly. And I think that's what we're talking about here is like the pyramids weren't built in one person's lifetime.
Right.
They were built in 3 people's lifetimes. Like you're passing on from generation to generation to generation, and you're working with like different architects, different plans, different artists. People are dying all the time during these great projects, and they'd have
So
to
it's
bring
not like their personal ambition. It's the ambition of the belief system or the ambition of the city or something like that. It's much more abstract than one person wanting their name lasted forever in a statue or something.
Right, exactly. I think that's a really good point to bring up. And I think that is like the major takeaway from this is like great works that your name might not be associated with. And like it might just be associated with like, and I suppose we can talk about things then like generational wealth and all that stuff, but I think that's going to be coming in a little bit more in the next Decan that in Capricorn 3. So we'll leave some of those topics if your mind is like, hey, why don't you talk about this? We will be, and I think it kind of fits a little bit into Capricorn 3, so we'll be going there. But yeah, like multi-generational, big, overarching projects that span whole communities, whole towns, like even more so like I think with the Greeks,
like slavery.
I was just that's where I was going to, which
colonialism.
Right, that kind of thing. Like
those are projects.
Yes, the Greeks were bringing in like elephants from India to do like their heavy lifting and things like this. So all right, moving on. Should we go to, now that we've mentioned the Picatrix? Thanks for bringing that in. It was a good time to do it, David. Should we move on to tarot?
Sure. Let me share my screen.
Oh my god!
Right?
Oh my god!
Right? I was waiting for that reaction, and I was so sad I didn't get to see it last time.
I love that so much, so fucking much.
So just to clarify, I think what David's very excited about is the depiction of the devil as the dog on the far right.
Absolutely.
So we saw a few examples of the devil card in the last Decan, and we'll see a couple different ones in the next one. But I thought this set was particularly relevant to our discussion today about the co-ruling with Mars. Dogs are a Martian animal, and yet I think that it's quite appropriate for it to be associated with the devil in this tarot deck, which is a cat tarot deck.
Oh, right, the dog.
That's what I saw.
That's from the cat tarot. Oh,
yes, it's from the cat tarot.
All right.
So anyway, it's a very happy looking golden retriever dog, just as the devil can come in all forms. But what I really want to highlight, that Chang brought up in T. Susan Chang brought up in her book 36 Secrets about this Decan, are that there's really a master of strategy element here, that we talked about with the general leading the wars, the long-term nature of certain things that are Saturnine, that can really be seen in some of the tarot cards. The minor arcana card, the 3 of Pentacles, which is specific to this Decan. There are a lot of fables about the devil being a trickster. We also talked about Pan in the last Decan a little bit, with the that energy of being a little bit of a jokester. You know, we think about Mercury oftentimes in that archetype, but there is really a devil element to that, because as the master of strategy, there is also an element of the master of manipulation. I don't know if you've ever heard some of those songs, like the Devil Went Down to Georgia, and how this person got tricked out of their golden fiddle. Well, it's speaking a little bit to that trickster energy, associated often with the devil. We have on the left the Rider-Waite-Smith depiction of the devil, which should be familiar by now. Interesting when you bring up, slavery being an institution like that over time, and it wasn't just one generation that made that happen. We see a depiction straight of slavery here in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. But we also have in the middle a traditional tarot deck depiction of the devil, which I thought was super interesting because it is different from what we often see the devil depicted as. One thing I want to mention is the trident that's in the devil here in the middle card. So we have talked already about the top of the Capricorn figure of the sea goat is a goat, and the bottom is the fish's tail. So thus it is a sea goat. And this is actually related to the myth of Pricus, or Precus, I believe is how you pronounce it, Pricus, which was a mythical half goat, half fish creature that was the offspring of Poseidon. So this creature was immortal, and ended up having many children, like little sea goats. And over time, the sea goats, though they were native to the sea, would climb out onto the land, and then they would try to climb up to the top of a mountain, as goats do, right? And yet they were part fish, so they did not survive. So being the immortal being of Pricus that he is, with the daddy who's the lord of the sea, he asked basically Kronos to turn back time so that his children wouldn't crawl up out of the sea and disappear. And yet, even after Kronos reversed time, they went and did it again, and again, and again, and again, to where, yeah. Do you want to finish, Elsa? I know that you had...
Oh, well, just that they suffer the same fate. And like, what I thought was interesting about this story is he's actually mourning his children's they sort of forget the sea, and they sort of like grow out of their tails. And like, I think in this way, we're talking about a little bit what David and I were alluding to before, of like, if you think of the sea as like this primordial water force, like the feminine force, like the mystical, the deep thought, the sort of like kind of like creative part, like the creative part of the vision, instead of just the achievement part of the vision, right? So they're losing like that like deep wisdom that was originally associated with Capricorn, or like the golden age of Saturn or something, and they're losing that as they start to go more and more onto land over time. But he sees that he sort of can't stop it, so he's like mourning the fact that, like, they can go out there and like climb to the highest mountain, but they're like losing their tail, they're like losing their not just heritage, but like their wisdom culture, sort of. and just being like very achievement oriented instead. And that was like, he was mourning that, and he was like, no matter how much like I try to stop it, I can't stop it. And that was the part that the wisdom factor was the part that he was sort of mourning, and the fact that his children didn't just like want to be with him and spend time with him and all that. So then he like asked the gods, like after turning back time a million times, realizing that no matter how much he tried to manipulate time, that they were making that same sort of like karmic decision or karmic path. Then he asked the gods if he could give up his immortality so that he could just sit by the seashore and mourn his children and just sort of like lose his life, because he couldn't like sit there as an immortal, like watching this time and time again, that they were losing all their wisdom and just becoming achievement oriented and just becoming land beings instead of water beings. And instead, which is kind of cruel, instead of allowing this immortality to happen. So again, we're playing with time, like reversing time, and now also like wanting to die, like not wanting time to churn on and churn on and churn on, but wanting the time to come to an end. Instead of giving him his mortality to just grieve this loss and sort of, you know, cry by the seashore is how I heard it, which I think is, you know, an awesome part of it. They immortalized him more by making him a constellation in the sky. So now forever he has to look upon this scene. So I don't know if that was like a punishment of like trying to reverse time like a bunch, or like wanting to sort of escape because Saturn can be like escapism too, like wanting to just escape and just like die. But instead, you know, now he's cast into the sky forevermore as this sort of like figure of time and of mourning in a sense too, and of like that loss of wisdom and that like overachievement and, you know, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's really
this is what imprisonment by matter looks like. The thing is, we associate the more unconscious side of us, the more instinctive side of us with the devil, because it is the side of us that, if left unchecked, if you don't balance it out with a little bit of light, with consciousness, you can get tricked by it, right? Truth is actually when you shed light in these demonic instincts that you have when they arise. Mm-hmm. And the truth is that throughout a human's life, you will have that war inside of you, and you will always have to choose to shed some light in your dark, you know? Mm-hmm. But acknowledging your dark, embracing your dark is not like, oh, denying it. It's just becoming a hostage to the situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that loss of wisdom, I think, is like part of it. And just to remind people, you know, Saturn is directly opposite both luminaries. So we're going to have Saturn as the ruler of Capricorn, and Saturn is the ruler of Aquarius. So we've got this double time thing happening.
So much Saturn.
yeah, double time. I get two, I reverse time, I go again, I have my turn back to back or whatever. And that sort of thing, that sort of back to back turn is happening, that like long frame of darkness is happening sort of in polarity to both the luminaries, the sun and the moon. So if you don't have like some illumination, like David is talking about, like some form of consciousness, which is represented by the luminaries, then you're just in this sea of darkness, you know?
Yeah, when you're used, like, it's more difficult when things are going right for you to choose to be made aware of your shadows. But if you have some kind of spiritual work, you will see, you'll be able to identify your shadows and keep them in check all the time, most of the time. Like, it's what gurus do, right? It's what spiritually evolved people, quote unquote, like the spiritual leaders that you see, will try to do. They will try to live according to their ideal as much as they can, trying to shed light as they go in those parts of them that are trying to impede them to live up to that particular ideal, right?
Yeah, and this Diablo, oh, so sorry, I thought you were finished. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that I think that this is the good relationship with the devil to have. Like, you have to have a relationship with the devil, keep it in check all the time. You have to be vigilant, and you have to be praying all the time, verbalizing, putting into a structure so you can shed light on it, basically, in other words. And talk to other people about it, confess, so you are keeping it conscious, you know, so you don't get stuck in those habits that the devil might represent as well.
And this is, you know, this is double malefic. We get some consciousness next decan with the sun as the rulership, but this is double malefic. So you might not see it as much, or it's going to be harder. Like, you have to work. Like, I guess Mars can bring some fire, but is it the fire of illumination or the fire of destruction? And you sort of see, you know, your worst sort of like temptations grabbing at the legs of this devil, right? Like dancing on top of these like flames and these like, you know, lower polarities of like facing your monsters. And yeah, like facing your monsters, like, or facing challenges does provide the opportunity to go like if life is just like pure pleasure, which I think is kind of like what the devil card in the Rider-Waite is like representing, how we can get trapped by materialism, pleasure, sex,
Desire, yeah.
desire, like things that feel good and keep us trapped. But then it's like, if you are faced with some kind of like hardship or conflict, then you're like, oh wait, life is suffering and all of that. And that can give you a moment of consciousness to like say like, oh, we can, you know, flip the script, or we can like look at the shadow. But it's not, again, always that easy. And hopefully here with like an exalted Mars, maybe you would have the courage to look at the shadow or fight against your temptations and come out.
Here
like,
you have no
victorious.
option. You have no option but to keep going through that path that is the narrowest, that is the harshest. Like it's almost a circumstance throws you in that particular situation so you can face it. And you get so used to it eventually that it becomes second nature for you to overcome those challenges that are proposed to you materially with the tools that are given to you in the best way possible. But again, this might make you a little bit of a hostage to your own desires, to your own materiality, because you are so used to pulling from that particular energy of the malefics to overcome your obstacles in life. It's like so exact, so like matter of fact and urgent in the way that it executes its will.
Yeah, and with this Diablo, like I kind of feel like, you know, the saying "come hell or high water" really reminds me of like a Saturn Mars thing, which hell would be the fires and water would be like the Saturn component, like the waves. So it's like, you know, you keep on going come hell or high water. And that's kind of like those large projects, right? It's like, I don't care how many people die. I don't care how many generations it takes to pull it off. I don't care how many challenges are in my way. Like it's fighting through like whatever field, whatever demons, whatever monsters are in your way, you're just like plowing through. So I think that second card kind of shows some of that energy as well.
Yeah. This is like a really classical depiction of the devil, which is why I included it. There's some symbolism here that we don't see in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck that really speaks to the devil. And one of those is the trident or the pitchfork. So I definitely wanted to mention those.
One thing that this reminds me of a little bit is Shiva Nataraj, like dancing in the ring of fire. So Shiva's like main, I guess, and some people say that it was taken, you know, from Shiva, this Trishula thing, this trident, into the devil sort of imagery. But I think it's really, you know, it could be a purifying force, like for all those Shiva devotees out there, because Shiva is known as the Lord of Death, right? And worshipped by goblins and ghouls and things like this. But also Shiva is known as the Destroyer, which is very much martial. So it's like you got Shiva, the Lord of Darkness, the, you know, black one, the fierce one, the scary one, right? And then you also have him being known as the destroyer of all things, just like blasted in one moment, everything's dead, and he's like the ultimate sort of warrior, but in like the spiritual realm, right? So it's just this is what it reminded me of. So I guess to purify that energy, you could definitely go with like a Shiva archetype or like a Kali archetype, which would be very much embodied by like the double malefics of this decan. Okay, onward.
Yeah, let's move on to Mars. So Mars is the co-ruler of this decan, and that the major arcana card is the Tower or the Blasted Tower. And we have three depictions here, but we have seen Mars before in a few different decans. Aries 1, Gemini 2, Leo 3, Scorpio 1, and we have yet to see it, but we'll also see Mars in Pisces 3. So compared to all the others, T. Susan Chang mentions in her book that this is a Mars that is most willing to cooperate with others. It is most willing to work with others in order to channel that raw energy that we were talking about earlier. So one of the quotes that she mentions, and I love it, is that Mars here will find work for idle hands. So, commanding, providing direction. On the far left, we have the Rider-Waite-Smith depiction. In the middle, we have the Mother Peace depiction of the Tower card. And I really liked this one for this decan specifically, because it also has that sort of spiritual undertone that we talked about with the myth of Pricus and the sea. There's an eclipse happening in this depiction, a lightning bolt of illumination that's affecting the tower. So almost like inspiration, that can come to lead to the plans for those great works that we talk about.
Yeah, what I like about the tower that we brought up before in the Pythagorean deck that we've mentioned a few times was the more clear depiction of an island with water around it. And again, as Elsa was mentioning earlier, returning to those primordial waters when you have that blast moment of sudden illumination, sudden consciousness. It has a Uranian character almost in the sense of the modern notion of Uranus. And so we see that Mars in this case is that seed, that Capricorn, the impulse to build structure, the impulse to build structure and build those habits that make one feel materially stable, safe, satisfied, in other words. Mars here can mean the inspiration to do that through the destruction of what is no longer working, right? It's the seeds that are planted of newness from burning everything that was standing previously. And to one's advantage, to one's conscious advantage, I would say. It was called the House of the Devil, so, traditionally, the Tower card.
Tower, the House of the Devil.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really interesting. I just like what you said about T. Susan Chang, when Mars is like more willing to work with others here. Again, Mars is exalted. So like when Mars is at its best, it's not like the solo competitor that's just like out to like win their own gold medal. If you think of like, group sports and athletes, like it's always like, that martial quality that's like, yeah, team, let's go team, and like really like rallying the troops, or like really giving that energy to the whole group, making someone like get behind your plan and like bring their own energy, that kind of like team sport, like kind of martial energy that I really feel. And and also like the military energy of like, going out there with your whole troop and like not leaving any man behind, and like that kind of quality of like the protector and like the group endeavor of the athlete, or the soldier or something like this, which is not out to win its own medals, but there for sort of the whole camp or whatever. And I really feel that way about this kind of like better quality or exalted quality of Mars, especially when structured, and it has a team goal. It's like team oriented. It's like, okay, here's the bigger goal. Now let's all rally behind it, and bring our energy, and kind of like high fives everywhere or something,
So I'll just note about the last card here on the far right from the Botticelli deck. It's really an interesting perspective given some of the terms that we've already used, and also given what we'll see depicted in the Three of Pentacles minor arcana. We see the tower as literally a structure crumbling. We don't see any sign of lightning strike or any sign of it being hit by anything. It's just falling apart here. And there are two people who are, it's a very interesting perspective amongst tarot cards, of it kind of having the human figures near the top and the falling debris around it being kind of clear that this was a well-constructed, or at least beautifully constructed, tower at one point in time. And the reason why this is interesting is because, again, when we get to the Three of Pentacles, especially in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, we see a depiction of three artisans crowded around what looks like a buttressed door in a cathedral, working in the stone, planning, serious planning, looks like it's happening. And so it's almost like in that picture of the tower coming down, this Martian image, out of that results the need to build a new one, which we have happening, the plans happening in the Three of Pentacles here.
Yes, it's not only the need to build a new one that is constantly required, resulting in this Three of Pentacles. The Three of Pentacles is mastery, again, because you keep practicing something. We've talked about this with the other threes. It's a transitional state. It's not the end goal. It's not the stability yet that you're striving to achieve, but it is the circumstantial validation of the process that you are engaging with since the Ace or since the Two. And here in the Three of Pentacles, the Earth side of this three polarity, you know, the number three expression that we were talking about, we have the constant reshaping of reality by those events that we have to just learn to predict. We have to just learn to adapt to when those situations, those sudden awareness moments that are so malefic come to us. And that is represented by being masters over certain features of reality, you know, certain paradigms of time. Like, you learn to adapt to time itself according to how it manifests to you over and over again. Basically, that idea of the mastery that we're referring to. And so Mars in the Three of Pentacles, I see as the component of doing something over time. You know, the transition, being in that transitional space that you're not sure of what's going to result from that, but still acting with the wisdom that you've acquired from previous experience, you know, from the material side of you, the muscle memory, basically, or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And just as a reminder to people, you know, the threes, all the suits of the threes are always going to be ruling the second decan of the cardinal signs. And so we've gone through the threes already. This is going to be our last cardinal sign. I'm going to cry. But we've gone so far in this decan journey. This will be our last of the cardinal signs as we conclude through Pisces. So just, you know, kind of remembering that the threes are sort of this, like David was saying, the middle stage of the action signs. Like cardinal is like starting new, right? And so you've got like the middle stage of the cardinal signs being represented by the different three qualities, or the different three elements, or four elements, but in the threes, you know. Yeah.
Time to take action.
Yeah, which is exemplified with the Mars, you know, and the Saturn. Like, you know, the malefics work. Like,
well,
the benefics chill.
And in her chapter, this card, this Three of Pentacles, resulting from what are two malefics, is actually quite a fruitful and quite a positive card. The Three of Pentacles is something that you want to see in almost every scenario that I can think of. So, yeah.
And it's interesting how two negative cards combined give this positive outcome, right? Because we've seen before where two seemingly positive influences, like the Five of Pentacles with the Magician and the Hierophant. You have two seemingly positive cards, but you have a negative kind of outcome because of how the mind or experience like your human experience perceives those energies combined from the perspective of the minor arcana.
And I mean,
in this case, it's the opposite.
Do you like my three buttons?
I love it. I noticed it right away.
Pips like to count, don't forget.
Yes, T. Susan reminds us all the time, pips like to count. And I love that they're black on the red. I really, you know, perfectly done, KD. You know, the idea of that too is like one okay, so in real life, sorry, I'm having like too many thoughts happening at once. Like in real life, you see that too. Like if people have too easy of a life or like too much money or too whatever, a lot of times like whatever it takes to like motivate to like do some like really ambitious quality might not be there. And when you have someone that's experienced hardship and they have like all this sort of like aggression or all this kind of like drive in them, it might lead to a lot of their hardships, but also to a lot of like masterpieces, which you see like in celebrity charts all the time. You're like, oh my god, person is so rich and famous and so successful, like let's take a look at their chart. And it's not like all benefic like you would imagine, right? So
you need
can
that
really
tension to make something.
Yeah, and you have good tension here because Saturn's in its domicile and you have, Mars in its exaltation. And what I think is just, just to bring it back like one more time, is like the tower is this big material project that we had, right? But it's being destroyed. And then you have, the Lord of the Gates of Matter, which is all about material. So really it's so material. That's why I think like in the threes, you get this rebuilding or this hope for building or this like energy for like group work. Like, you see the three people also like in the card, like you see people working together in the threes all the time too. So and you see the three in the devil and the twins or the Gemini, you see that kind of like three being brought in, and three is a crowd, right? Like two is something, but then three is a crowd. So I feel like because they're both speaking to matter, whether or not you're building matter or whether or not you're like destroying matter or whether or not matter is a trap, you still have humanity working together with matter all the time, for better or worse. And I think that's what you see in the three, just that like building quality and working together quality.
Yeah, well, actually, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Mother Peace deck, and then I want to bring something else here. This Mother Peace image is just doubling down on what we see in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, and that it's people working together, like you say, multiple people working together to construct something big. But just as with most other of the images that we're going to be discussing, there are two sides, like a more maybe what we would consider positive or negative manifestation of some of these energies. And so I want to take us on a thought experiment of how this sort of energy could be perverted, which I believe we've made reference to in the beginning when you're talking about like capitalism and drive and the impulse to do things. Essentially, the impulse to do things that are just self-serving. There are many examples of this throughout history. Great people who have decided they wanted their name immortalized in statues, in bridges, in buildings, and on the backs of so many people dying for some sort of like just complete utter waste, really, like something that's not even used or hasn't withstood the test of time for people to remember the person who it's named after, or maybe it has literally crumbled. So we do need to consider
the monarchy,
other side, like the monarchy. But there's a quote that I want to read from the chapter in Chang's book. She says, "Perhaps all our ambitions and their fruit are futile, doomed to return to dust in a few decades. Channel your energies into something tangible. Passion and the effort are the treasure here, not just the resulting object." So that's really important to think about with the Three of Pentacles. This is not greed. This is not making something out of, just an aesthetic appeal. This is directed effort that is a reward in its own right.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. Like if you think of just like the idea of like coming together with community for like a common, goal or whatever. Again, that kind of almost like team camaraderie, I guess, or whatever, or like the fact that you have enough hope and enough drive like in humanity to dream big and put action behind it. Like I guess it's like those character building tools that are really exemplified here and not necessarily the work itself.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
So bonding. I'm looking
bonding.
I love this.
I know the science deck, the science deck and the Scapini deck both are rich with symbolism that I want to talk about. So bonding in the science deck is represented for the Three of Pentacles because we're looking here at the image of H2O. It's hydrogen and the oxygen bonding together to create water, but they independently, oxygen and hydrogen, something totally different. Together, they come to make something that's incredibly powerful and exhibits different quantities or qualities in and of itself. You know, water can be a gas, it can be a solid, and it can be a liquid, depending on the surrounding temperature and other factors of the environment in which you find it. So it's, again, the hydrogen and the oxygen are working together to create something greater than the sum of its parts, which I think is a direct quote from what you said earlier, David, but really resonates with me in the science deck for the Three of Pentacles.
Always beautiful depictions and flawless references.
In the Scapini deck, we have, I guess on its face, it does remind me a little bit of the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. Again, I'm talking about the one on the far right now, in that there is this stone and metal work that seems to be going on. But there are some distinctions here. First, the figure that is in stone above the what might be a crypt, which is very Saturnine, right? The figure in stone is an artist. So it does speak to some of the creative energy and output that can come from the malefics coming together. But so thus it is a little bit less about collaboration here, because we do have the singular figure. But we also have representations of things like money and diamonds, which have to do with that resource intensive need to, again, to build something that's going to withstand the test of time. Depicted in each of those coins, we have Venus at the top, goddess of love with her swans. We have Caesar, you know, the emperor of Rome. And then at the very bottom, we have some guy just dancing and having a
Like
great
the
time.
Fool.
Like the Fool. He's the Fool, exactly. Yeah, so they speak of beauty and wealth, but it's not warmth. It's not
again
warmth.
referencing the passion that you were saying, like Caesar's representing that part of the ego. You know, I want to see myself here depicted, and Venus is the attractiveness, the things around you, the glamour that you use for those particular purposes that validate that self-perspective. And the Fool is the motivation for that, because you have to be a fool to be, you know, all self-centered like that in a way. But exactly. even that being true, even if you're a fool, you have to be that type of fool to be able to achieve something as great as what we are referencing here in these cards. You have to be a fool to the point of idealism, but just crazy enough that you will achieve it materially, you know?
Yeah, and I love this stone, like Saturnine character. And it's like this artist is standing on a crypt, but let's say the artist is doing the art for what? Is it for his own nature, for his own name, or is it so that the, you know, people can enjoy like the tactile service or whatever? And then with
even
the
if
diamond,
it is for his own name, he will have to be mixed in with the collective narrative somehow, because the collective has to support it, right? In this case.
Yeah, and I just wanted to bring up diamonds. I know diamonds are classically a Venusian, like in magic and astrology, like diamonds are associated with Venus because of their brilliance and beauty and clarity and whiteness and things like that. But just the idea of the diamonds here is so Saturnine. Again, you have metal and metallurgy, which is Mars, and you have stone, and you know that kind of like coldness of like working with stone would be Saturn. And then diamonds, you know, they're made of coal, and they're made from pressure, and they're made from time, you know? So yeah, so when I think of like, you know, I think of Saturn exalted in Libra when I think of diamonds, really, because like I know they're a Venusian thing when they're cut and polished, and they're to make, you know, people adorned and beautiful, and that's why we have them as a Venusian thing. But really, the diamond to me is like a Saturnine thing, especially when you're giving it to someone because you want to spend a life with them. And it's like, right. And it's like this thing that's like, you know, outlast your life. And it's made through like this black coal pressurized over however many, you know, like this broad span of time or whatever, you know.
And it's also, I mean, diamonds are also incredibly tough. They are used as abrasives in some products and materia. So it's like, that's the other thing. It's not going to just crumble or disintegrate.
Yeah, they're used in a lot of like stone cutting and metal work and all these kinds of things, which I think is just like such a, I guess it's the highest quality of Saturn and Mars, again, that we see here, which is like making great works that last over time, but also just like, you know, making the perfect sword or the perfect coin or whatever, the working
the most stable molecular structure.
Yeah, and just making something that's like stable that everyone can use, like money or like stonework or like swords or like metalwork and things like that. It's like it's got all this implication, but at the same time, it's like, you know, it really built humanity, and it does have a creative kind of undertone. It's, I guess, how you use the, again, like the devil, how you use the power, how you use the magic, how you use the materia, but it definitely has, you know, there's a creative energy behind it.
I see more in the Scapini deck, the more and more that we're looking at these minor arcana cards, especially kind of the cautionary sides of what we talk about a lot. Even if it's like a positive card, there is the cautionary element of this, you know, being the fool and doing things just for the ego and the beauty, as opposed to the purpose.
Yeah, for love and money, right? Like, why do we have art and money? It's to like get like girls and power, whatever. Like, you know, I don't know, something like that.
But there's
It's
nothing
like
warm here. There's nothing living here. It's just, yeah.
It's just the thing, right? And it's like the fool's errand or the fool's endeavor. Yeah, that's really, really, there's a lot there and to talk about always with this Scapini.
Well, when we get to the 10 of Pentacles, we see some completion of a project that really, again, as we said, allows one to see the fruits of their labor in a way that validates who they are to themselves. What has value to them is a more personal thing. Here with the 3, it is about passion, but it's a kind of passion that is driving you, that is not necessarily something that is your life's work. Sure, it's work that can last a lifetime, but it's not necessarily your life's work. That's something I think we might want to highlight from the 3 of Pentacles.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting too, because, you know, we think of like Capricorn as the last earth sign. And yes, if we start at Aries, it is, right? And we've got like these quote unquote like more mature signs as we go, or however you want to look at that. But cardinality is the starter, right? So it's like you've got almost like the first earth sign, like the starting, the bang, where Taurus, it's like, it's, you know, it's steady, it's fixed, it keeps you going on plowing and the endeavor, whatever. It sort of could keep your material work going. And then you have Virgo, which is kind of like, you know, the sarcophagus, like the kind of like death and harvest and reaper of the earth signs. Really, you have, you know, the cardinality here of maybe even the immaturity, right, of like just taking raw materials and just like setting out for the goal. So we have to remember that, like, in the chronological stages, is maybe, you know, Capricorn is the starter, Taurus is the sort of fixed middle, and Virgo is sort of like reaping of the harvest at the end. So just to kind of like remind us again that, you know, just the cardinality. And we see a lot of the things we're talking about here, materials and the 3s working together, and, you know, like even the kind of Lord of the hosts of the mighty, right? The power of Mars or the power of the Tower is really starter energy, which we get from the cardinality of the earth materia here.
And the decan associated with the 10 of Pentacles is Virgo 3. So definitely
that's
go back
kind of,
and
that's
watch
what,
that video to like contrast, you know, like.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't make that explicit. I just sort of like went with that. But yeah, that's what reminded me, is David was saying like the 10 of Pentacles, and you're thinking like Virgo is like all this death and like reaper and kind of like your final harvest before the winter or whatever, you know. So you're seeing we kind of did the conclusion before the beginning in this sense, so like the way that we laid it out starting at Aries. So it's good to remember, right, that Capricorn also could be like climbing out of the primordial waters onto land as like the first of the earth signs, right?
Yeah.
So it's just good to kind of like flip the perspective a little bit on that.
Totally.
So let's go on to nativities, shall we?
So one of the figures that was born during this decan was Isaac Asimov, who is a very, very famous science fiction writer. And I thought this sounded like the most Mars Saturn thing I've ever heard in my life. This quotation from him. He says, "Self-education is, I firmly believe, the only kind of education there is. The only function of a school is to make self-education easier. Failing that, it does nothing."
I
Is
love that.
a very, very aggressive but independent sort of mindset, and I wanted to make sure to share that since this is his birth decan.
That is really fiercely independent, very fiercely Capricorn, and just with the kind of like cutting edge of speech that Mars might have here is just very decisive and active. Yeah, I love that. Thank you.
We have some other people, honorable mentions, like Tolkien, the writer of The Hobbit and the whole saga of the Lord of the Rings. Isaac Newton.
We also have Marilyn Manson and David Bowie, which are two very interesting, pretty like artistic, sure, yeah.
And David Bowie died during this decan as well. He wasn't just born.
Sad. Yeah, it was like right before his birthday or something.
Mm-hmm. It was right before our birthday because we share dates, I think, or just 1 day apart.
Birthday twin.
Birthday twin.
Marilyn Manson, not to say too much because it can be super triggering with what he's going through right now, but if you don't have like an archetype of just like blackness, which is Saturn, just like that gothic image and just like all the blood and shock rock and gore that he was into, so it was like very pared back, minimalistic, like gothic like trend, but also
it could be a depiction of the devil. Yeah, like
absolutely ripping up the Bible and doing things like that, but also just like all the blood and guts and like horror aspect. It's not like the goth that's like stripped back and quiet, dressed in black in the back of the room. It's like very in your face, and so that's a real, but maybe more malefic version of Mars and Saturn as far as like the image goes.
I think Joan of Arc is a very archetypical image for the second because she is this teenager who was probably schizophrenic, but also had such a passion about her own reality. Like her mind, her consciousness wouldn't let go of what she believed to be the reality that she was experiencing. And she gave words to it in a way that convinced people around her into achieving the greatest of deeds at the time, which was putting an end to a war that had lasted literally for 100 years. And so, but after doing that, she still fell, as a teenager. She died as a teenager. Like she didn't go past 19, I think. And she was burned at the stake by the English, being given to them by the French, who sold her out, basically, when she became a nuisance. So that's
and the fact that her story really lasts over time is like a brave and fierce like idea warrior or something like that, which I think we've got like the war of ideas here, like with the Capricorn Mars vibe
and just over religion and spirituality.
She served impossible, girl.
yes, and being burned at the stake is a very like I think very Martian kind of like Saturnine kind of thing happen to go. Okay, so then we have Isaac Newton, which I think is kind of impressive. Do you guys have anything you want to add to that Isaac Newton story?
Yeah, I mean, his ideas have lasted for a long time. And what was he studying but how the materia interacts with like our atmosphere and our reality when he discovered or coined the theory of gravity.
Also on that same note, Stephen Hawking, another great thinker and like kind of like, that far expanse as far as like ideas and like that one track mind and getting people on board with like those big ideas and big projects and in a worthwhile way, great thinkers, I think. Tolkien could be put there too. It's more imaginative, but it's like world building in a sense,
And many people think that even though he rejects it, it's almost certain that J.R.R. Tolkien's books were influenced by World War I, for instance. So out of that terrible, tragic war, Mars, we have a long-term lesson by looking away from even Earth and like reality into a fantasy world. But there's lessons there. There are really important, meaty things to think about in that book as it pertains to humanity.
And that's the tale of the goat, I think, right? Is like using like myth and metaphor and like wisdom to sort of build this like creative scene in order to like impress upon you something, you know, deeper or whatever. I think that's that like mystical part of Capricorn or whatever, you know, because it's still world building, essentially. You're still building structures. You're still building towers and worlds. It's just in the world of, you know, imagination in this case or whatever.
Yeah.
And so we come to another close of another chapter of this Decanic walk that we're taking together. I hope you guys had fun. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, comment your thoughts. We're going to greatly appreciate it.
And everybody wish David a happy birthday in the comments below. Little birthday cake.
We didn't sing to you, but we will. Off
Yeah.
camera.
Oh, yeah. No, I was like, I know you sang to me and everything, but David, please don't.
I'm glad with just the poem.
Oh, yeah. That we'll dedicate the poem to you this time.
Oh, all right.
But I know it's
I hope it's a good one. I hope it's not a heavy one.
Of course it is. This is Capricorn. Of course it's a heavy one, but sure, I'll dedicate it to you, David.
But yeah, thank you guys for joining. And you can find David at In the First Place Astrology for tarot readings and for astrology readings and tutoring. You can find KD Dayton at kddayton.com for the same. And myself in the About section. You can also follow us over on Instagram, Hellenistic Astrology, or catch up with us on Patreon, Hellenistic Astrology on Patreon. We are moving through the Demetra George Volume 2 book, so please join us over there for that. And again, Happy New Year. Thank you all Capricorns for being here. Katie?
All right, so this poem at the end of Chang's chapter on Capricorn II is called Scaffolding by Seamus Heaney. Masons, when they start upon a building, are careful to test out the scaffolding, make sure that planks won't slip at busy points, secure all ladders, tighten bolted joints. And yet all this comes down when the job's done, showing off walls of sure and solid stone. So if, my dear, there sometimes seem to be old bridges breaking between you and me, never fear. We may let the scaffolds fall, confident that we have built our wall.
Matao kakao bersama you demikian soba dah soba kena matai bang kau di mana demikian soba dan soba matai bang ujung baikana kemaya tak ongai esa koyo koyo masena mata ibe kana sabaso inakina tabaine toyo guys imba yetoma tabaike